Welcome, welcome, everyone. We see that you're making your way in. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you all are in the world. We are just delighted that you have decided to dedicate an hour of your time to learn all about financial aid with really wonderful insights from the admissions team as well. My name is Janessa Dunn, Director of Admissions here at Skidmore College, and I have the wonderful privilege of presenting alongside my fabulous colleague, Beth. Beth, do you mind introducing yourself?
Thanks, Janessa. It's my pleasure to be spending the evening with you and for all you folks who, as Janessa said, are joining us this evening to learn more about financial aid and also financial aid at Skidmore. So I'm Beth Post. I'm the Director of Financial Aid here at Skidmore. I'm in my, I guess, my 15th year here at Skidmore and my 38th year of administering financial aid at different institutions in New York State. So hopefully the information we're going to share with you tonight will provide you some overview and some insight and information that will help clarify some of the things that folks find confusing about the financial aid process and give you a better sense of how it all works and comes together to finally produce a financial aid award decision for those of you who apply.
Yes, absolutely. And we will want to share with you as well, especially if you may have to step aside or you may have other obligations during this time. Please know that this webinar is recorded. And so after today's session, within about 1 to 2 business days, you will receive an email to notify you to access our recording here. So that way you can get all the information that you need to be best prepared for this process. I will also share, some of you may have joined us in our session last week, where I had the opportunity to have a wonderful conversation with our Vice President for Enrollment and Dean of Admissions at Financial Aid, Jess Ricker. And of course, tonight, in addition to several areas, we have other webinars. Next week, we have the wonderful privilege of hearing from our very own President, Mark Connor, who will be able to share more information as well. Later on, actually this week, we have opportunities for you to engage with current students to ask questions that are meaningful to you. And so we will ensure that that information is accessible to you after today's webinar. And of course, please feel free to visit our website for more details as well. So without further ado, I would like to go ahead and jump into this conversation. Please know if whether you're a student or a parent, guardian, community advocate, high school counselor, know that we want to hear from you. So at the bottom of your screen, whether you're on your mobile device or on a laptop, whatever that means for you as well, please feel free to enter your questions. We have two fabulous admissions team members, Deanna Dowdy, as well as Lisa Ronaldo Johnson, who will be able to assist you along the way. And of course, we will have a live Q&A with our very own Beth Post, who is a wealth of knowledge. But for right now, please feel free to kind of get strapped in, take out your notebooks or your phones to take notes, and we're going to go ahead and get started. Beth.
Thanks, Janessa. You can go right ahead to the first slide, please. Okay, so we're going to start here to kind of get a definition in place for what is financial aid, because actually there's a lot of confusion about that very basic understanding. What is financial aid? Most people think of financial aid as being gift aid, grants or scholarships that are given to a student based on financial need or maybe athletic ability or other talents or achievement. And gift aid, grants and scholarships, is financial aid. That is part of the financial aid umbrella. But it's not the only part. In addition to gift aid, which is the best kind of financial aid that a student or family can receive, there's also loans and work. So loan aid, some folks are like, why is loan aid, loans that we have to repay with interest, why is that considered financial aid? Well, the only reason the federal government or a private lender would give you an educational loan is because you're attending college. So if the student is attending college, they can often access these federal or institutional private loans to help finance their portion of the costs of attendance. And because they're attending college and it's tied to them attending college, it's also considered financial aid. But make no mistake, these federal student loans that you might be awarded, if you decide to borrow them, you do have to repay them over time with interest. But it does, as I said, allow you to finance a portion of what you need to pay over time rather than making that full payment that 1 year, for example, your first year. So it allows you to spread the payments out over time, but it does come usually with interest and fees, and it is more expensive than paying right out of pocket. In addition to loan aid and gift aid, there's also work aid. And many of you have probably heard of student employment. Our students at Skidmore all can participate in student employment if they would like to. And that's where a student who is attending a college can get a part-time job. If it's federal work study, then the federal government is paying a portion of those wages for the student to be able to work while they're attending school and earn some money that they usually receive in a paycheck, and they save that up for the next semester's tuition, or they use it for books or personal expenses during the semester which they've earned it. So there are really 3 types of financial aid: gift aid, grants and scholarship, loans, which are for students or parents, and work aid, which is a part-time student employment on campus at a college. So this is a chart of the main government assistance that's available to U.S. citizens and U.S. permanent residents. We in the financial aid office evaluate families' eligibility for this, so you don't have to worry about memorizing the eligibility criteria or deeply understanding what it's based on. That's the job of the financial aid administrator. What your job is to complete the financial aid application or applications on time by the college's deadline. For Skidmore, our financial aid deadline for early decision round 2 and for regular decision is actually today, January 15th. Don't worry, if you haven't yet completed those financial aid applications, you still have time to do so. So just get them in as quickly as you can. Really, we would recommend no later than the end of January, but you do have a little more time if you're struggling, if you have questions, if you're just now finding out that maybe you do need to or want to apply for financial aid at Skidmore. So today is the deadline, but we're flexible with that. So your job is to apply for consideration for financial aid. And when you list Skidmore as a college to receive your financial aid application, the financial aid office evaluates your circumstances to determine what you might qualify for. So I'll go through these one by one, but again, you don't have to worry about being able to do this yourself, but having a basic understanding of how these programs work should be helpful to you in the coming months ahead. So the first line there is the federal Pell Grant. The source of the funds for a federal Pell Grant is the federal government. It's the gift type of financial aid, so it's a grant. It does not have to be repaid. It's given to the student to help defray educational expenses. The most a student can receive in the federal Pell Grant in 1 year is just under $7,400. And it's based on something called the SAI, or Student Aid Index. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more further in the presentation. But essentially, it's an index based on the number of people in your household, your income, and your assets to determine on a scale whether you might qualify for this federal Pell Grant. A shortcut way to kind of get a sense of that is really if your family income is in the $55,000 adjusted gross income or less range, then you may qualify for the federal Pell Grant. And of course, the lower it is, the higher your Pell Grant will be, up to $7,395 in 1 year. In addition to the federal Pell Grant, if you are a New York State resident attending a New York State college, you may qualify for the TAP grant, and that stands for the Tuition Assistance Program. Again, that's gift aid, so it's the best kind of financial aid to receive. It's a grant. It doesn't have to be repaid. The most you can receive in 1 year is about $5,500. But again, you must be a New York State resident attending a New York State college and a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. The eligibility criteria for TAP is that your New York net taxable income of the parent and the student combined must be less than $125,000. In order to get more than the minimum TAP grant in 1 year, and the minimum TAP grant is $1,000, your New York net taxable income would have to be less than $80,000. And it has to be less than about $7,000 in order for you to qualify for the maximum TAP grant in 1 year. In addition to those two grants, the federal government also makes available, as you learned from the previous slide, federal student loans. And so this is a subsidized loan from the federal government. Subsidized means the government's paying the interest for you if you decide to borrow this loan for the whole time you're enrolled in college, at least half time, and for 6 months after you graduate or leave school. This loan is entirely in the student's name, so the parent doesn't co-sign on it, even if the student's 17 or 18, it's entirely in the student's name. And the most that a student can borrow as a first-year student is $3,500 in this subsidized type of student loan. The eligibility criteria is based on the student having to demonstrate financial need, and that's something else I'll talk about in a few minutes. And the student has to be enrolled at least half time. For all of these types of financial aid, the student must be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. The interest rate is a fixed interest rate on these student loans, but it changes every academic year. This current academic year, 2024-25, the interest rate is about 6.5% on these federal student loans. No payment needs to be made while the student's enrolled at least half time, and the standard repayment term is 10 years. Very similar terms for the unsubsidized type of federal student loan, but interest is accruing on the unsubsidized type of federal student loan while the student's enrolled and during repayment. The most a student can receive who's a first-year student who's also receiving the subsidized type of student loan is $2,000. And the eligibility criteria on this loan, there's no need criteria, so the student does not have to demonstrate financial need in order to borrow this type of student loan, but they still do have to be enrolled at least half time. In addition to those two types of student loans, the federal government makes available to parents something called the PLUS loan, and that stands for Parent Loan for Undergraduate Students. So in this case, the parent is the borrower of the loan. The maximum that the parent can borrow in one academic year is the cost of attendance at that college. So that can really vary depending upon the cost of the college. It's the cost of the college minus any federal or minus any other student aid that the student's receiving. The eligibility criteria for this is that the parent must have a clear credit history. So it's not based on the parent's credit score, and it's not based on debt to income ratio for the parent, but the government will do a credit check and will look at your credit history. So if you had a recent bankruptcy, for example, this kind of thing would disqualify the parent from borrowing the federal parent loan. However, if the parent is denied the federal parent loan, the government makes or allows the student to be able to borrow an additional up to $4,000 in the unsubsidized type of student loan. So with the parent denial of the PLUS comes an additional $4,000 borrowing power for the student in the unsubsidized student loan. The interest rate on the PLUS is also a fixed rate, so it doesn't change once you borrow it, but it's not yet been set for the 25-26 academic year. For the 24-25 academic year, just looking at my notes, it's just over 9% is the fixed interest rate. No payment needs to be made on any of these three types of student loans while the student's attending college and enrolled at least half time. But on all but the subsidized student loan, interest is accruing during that time. The standard repayment term on all of the loans is 10 years, but there are alternative repayment options, so you can extend the repayment term if you need to in order to reduce the monthly payment. In addition to those financing options, there is the federal work-study program. So the source of those funds is actually a combination of the federal government and the college. It's a matching program. That kind of or the type of financial aid is the student work or employment. Annual maximum can be set by each college. At Skidmore, it's $2,600. So I put in there roughly $2,500. That's about the average that we see in the financial aid world. And it's based on the student has to demonstrate financial need and school policy. This is one kind of financial aid that colleges run out of. So the federal government gives the college a sum of money. We determine who qualifies for federal work study as long as they demonstrate need, and then we run out of those funds. So this is one reason why you don't want to be late in general on your financial aid applications, so that you don't miss some of these funds that have a limited amount available. At Skidmore, however, we don't just have the federal work study program, we have a very robust Skidmore work study program, which does not have the financial need criteria attached. It's also available to all our international students. So at Skidmore, any student who wishes to can work at a part-time job on campus and earn up to $4,000 each academic year. We'll go to the next slide. So how do you get access to all of those funds? You need to complete the financial aid applications. So at Skidmore, the primary financial aid application for admissions applicants is the CSS profile. So that's a financial aid application that the College Board developed and administers. It's the same College Board that administers the SAT test. So the College Board administers this. You send your data to them, you complete the financial aid application, you list Skidmore on there, and then we receive your financial aid application, review it to determine whether you have need, and you'll see in a few minutes what that means, and then advise you if you're admitted of what you qualify for. Other colleges have different criteria. So we also, for US citizens and permanent residents, require the FAFSA, but not until the student has been admitted and decides to enroll at Skidmore. So we use the FAFSA in order to be able to process your federal aid and also to verify the data that you're providing to us on the CSS profile. So at Skidmore, we don't need the FAFSA until and unless you've been admitted and enrolled. Many other colleges only use the FAFSA. So don't go by that. You'll need to, if you're applying to other colleges, you'll need to investigate what they require and by when. As a returning student at Skidmore, if you were to enroll at Skidmore, we do require the FAFSA each year as well as the CSS profile. If you're an international student, you can complete the CSS profile as well, and we'll receive that and review it just like a domestic student. If the CSS profile is not an affordable option for you as an international student, there's a separate application in the admissions portal, which will be available to you as long as on your admission application, you indicated that you intend to apply for financial aid. So that's the key. If you are a US citizen or permanent resident, the College Board waives the fee for families. I think the threshold is $125,000 income or less. So the College Board will waive that fee for domestic students who demonstrate a need for that. And for internationals, we have an alternative right inside the admissions portal. If you're a New York State resident, planning on or considering attending a New York State college like Skidmore, you want to complete the New York State TAP grant application. It should be available to you upon submission of the FAFSA, and there's no rush to do that for Skidmore. We won't start processing TAP applications and applicants until over the summer once you've enrolled, but the link is there if you need it, if you are going to be applying to New York State colleges. And you should only do that TAP application after you've completed the FAFSA. So usually these financial aid applications are available around October 1st for the upcoming year. They're all available now. The FAFSA had a bit of a fiasco last year. We're all really grateful that that is not the case so far this year. The FAFSA opened right around December 1st and became available to complete for 2025-26. And so you could complete that already for the next academic year if you need to. Go on. Okay, great. So the FAFSA, like the CSS profile, is a standard form that collects basic information about you and your family. It's really not that difficult to complete anymore. Every year for the past probably decade, the government has tried to streamline it and remove unnecessary questions and make it as simple as possible for families to complete. So now they've sort of split it into two for dependent students, so students who are traditionally right out of high school, and the parents complete one section and the student completes one section. The student should be the initiator of the application, complete their information, which is basically things like your name, your date of birth, your address, whether you're going to be a first-year student, if you're a veteran, if you're married, if you have children, a lot of demographic information like that. And then also income information. So did you earn anything in the previous year? Do you have untaxed income? Asset information. Do you have cash savings checking? If so, how much, etc. And then you list your parents' email information on there, and your parent is then invited to provide their information on your FAFSA. So it's available in English and Spanish online, and it really has been very streamlined. The most difficult part these days is creating your user ID and password. It's so secure. There's so many, you have to create security questions. You have to answer security questions. That's really the most difficult part these days. But this is for US citizens and permanent residents only, the FAFSA. You can go on to the next slide. And this is just a screenshot of what the FAFSA looks like. And I'm spending some time here in the FAFSA because this presentation isn't just for Skidmore applicants. I hope all of you on this presentation are or will be applying to Skidmore. But even if you aren't, this information is applicable to any college. So as I said, many colleges only use the FAFSA, and so it's worth the time to take to review this with you. This is what the homepage of the FAFSA looks like when you want to start it. After you've got your user ID and password set up, you click there to start it. If you decide, oh, you know what, I did the FAFSA because this other college required it, but I am applying to Skidmore, go ahead, you can log in as a returning user and add Skidmore to your FAFSA that you've already completed, or you can add other colleges. If you realize you've made a mistake, you can log back in and make those corrections. So the FAFSA is available. You complete it and you can log back in to take care of those transactions if you need to.
So Beth, you have just given us a huge and wonderful introduction into the different types of financial aid and really thinking through the different forms that are required for our applicants, domestic and international applicants, to apply to Skidmore and even perhaps elsewhere. Now, digging in a little bit more deeply, we understand that sometimes the information that is input into these forms, of course, on our end, on the college and university side, we're seeing it verbatim in that space. So can you walk us through, some of the common errors or questions that you see students or families, and especially with your wealth of experience, not only at Skidmore, but multiple institutions?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. So I've got some listed here in the next page on this PowerPoint because it's super difficult or complicated to recover from some of these mistakes that we see families make in the financial aid office year over year over year. So if I can get to some of you before you make these mistakes, or if you hear it tonight and you've made a mistake, you have a chance early in the process, it's still pretty early in the process, to go in and update your FAFSA and change it or correct it. So the first is really more of a tip. So the student initiates the FAFSA by logging in once they've created a FAFSA user ID and password. And contributors are one or both parents that provide their financial information. So just to think of it that way, I think is helpful to reduce the possibility of errors. If the parents of the student are married but filed tax separately, both parents must get their own FAFSA user ID and password, and both of them must log in as contributors to the FAFSA, or the FAFSA won't be valid, and it will be harder for all colleges that you've listed on there to put together an estimate even of your financial aid eligibility. So that's one tip. If parents are married and filed taxes separately, all of you need to get FAFSA user ID and passwords and sign off on the FAFSA and say you allow the IRS to populate the FAFSA with your income data. You should just be aware that Homeland Security is checking for your citizenship status only of the student, not of the parent. There's no requirement that parents need to be U.S. citizens or permanent residents, but the student does on the FAFSA for federal aid purposes. They're also checking with the Social Security Administration to make sure the Social Security number that you've entered matches the name that you've entered. So be careful when you're filing or first setting up your user ID and password or completing the FAFSA that you don't use a shortened name like Mike instead of Michael or something, because then it won't match with the Social Security Administration, and it'll take you it'll be a hassle for you to untangle all of that and rework it correctly. So if you haven't done that yet, keep that in mind. If you haven't completed those steps yet, keep that in mind. So students whose parents are divorced or separated, for both the FAFSA and the CSS profile, you want to provide or invite the parent who provides more than 50% of your support to be the completer of your FAFSA data. The other parent, who I will very loosely refer to as the non-custodial parent, does not provide any information on your FAFSA nor on the primary CSS profile. If the primary parent who's completing the FAFSA with you is remarried, that parent's current spouse's information also must be provided on the FAFSA. So that's how that works. You have to pick one parent whose information goes on the FAFSA if your parents are divorced or separated, and that's the parent who provides more financial support to you. And then if that parent's remarried, that parent's current spouse also has to provide information, but not the non-custodial parent. Let's see what else is on here. When you're completing information about your assets on the FAFSA, you need to, on the FAFSA, make sure you exclude any funds that are in qualified retirement plans. So if you have funds in a 403B, they do not get counted as an asset. Do not report them as an asset on the FAFSA. No one will ever know you made that mistake, and that will count against you in our determination of your eligibility for some of these funds. The home value and debt also are not reported on the FAFSA. This is only on the FAFSA. On the profile, which we'll get to in a minute, you will report your home value and debt. 529 college savings plans are reported as a parent asset, not as a student asset. And these other funds, UGMA and UTMA, are reported as the student asset. If you don't know what a UGMA or UTMA is, that means you don't have one, so don't worry about it. They're a certain kind of savings account. Hopefully that helps a little.
Oh my dear goodness, I'm learning something new every time I'm in the space with you, Beth. And for those of you who are unaware, Beth and I work very closely along with our teams to really go through this process in a way that is not only accessible to us, but also to you all. Some of you may be parents and guardians who this may be your first child going through this process, or you may have gone through this process in previous years, but it looks so different. And so understanding the nuances is just really incredible. So again, Beth, thank you for sharing your information in this space, and also some of the most common questions that we received during this time. So with that in mind, and especially as we consider all of this documentation, the CSS profile, the FAFSA at a different time, maybe perhaps a non-custodial document to help fill in this information, can you kind of walk us through how demonstrated need is calculated for us? And also, can you define demonstrated need as well?
Yes. So, well, first here we have another page to let me just quickly go over. And there was one other thing on the previous page about what email address a student should use on the FAFSA or the profile. Sometimes a student has a high school email address and they use that, but then that can expire, and you'll need to be reusing your email address every year when you apply for financial aid. So avoid students using an email address that's tied to something that will expire that you can't access again in the future. That's an important, easy one too. So sorry I missed this page here, but tax filers, you've got to, when you're filling out the FAFSA, you've got to provide consent for the IRS to upload your information, or that FAFSA won't be valid. Family members in college, this is one thing that is a real advantage at a place like Skidmore. So for federal student aid, it no longer matters if there is more than one dependent in the family enrolled in college. So it doesn't affect your federal eligibility whatsoever. At a place like Skidmore, where the vast majority of funds, by the way, are institutional grant funds, they're not federal or state funds, they're institutional. Skidmore grant is by far the biggest source of financial aid at Skidmore. So for Skidmore grant purposes, it does matter whether there's more than one dependent enrolled in your family in college, and it does increase your eligibility if you've got one, two or three or however many children enrolled at the same time. So that still matters for the CSS profile. And household size on the FAFSA is going to be based on your tax return, not on your actual situation. So if it's out of sync, if your tax return from the base year doesn't match your current household status, you have an opportunity to change that. So now we can go forward and talk about the CSS profile. So in addition to the FAFSA, there is this other form, and it's a big one, and it's called the CSS profile, and it is the form that Skidmore requires for you to be considered for our grant assistance. And at Skidmore, our grant assistance is based on financial need. It's based on your family's financial circumstances as compared to our cost of attendance. So those two things are related, and I'm going to get there in just a minute and answer Janessa's question. But we require the CSS profile, not just the FAFSA, for two reasons. One, it collects a lot better information, not just more information, but better information than the FAFSA does. So we have a better idea in the financial aid office of what's really going on in the family. So it's not, for example, not just using your base year income. It's asking you also to tell us, and by the way, for 25-26, base year's 2023. So it's not just saying, give us your 2023 snapshot. It's saying, well, what happened in 2024? Is there a big difference for any reason? And what is it looking like for you for 2025? So that we can see, was there a big jump in 2023 and it's going to level out in 2024 and 2025? Well, we might be able to take that in consideration up front. Somebody lose a job? Does somebody retire? Does someone go back to work? All of that will be incorporated in the CSS profile, not available on the FAFSA. Other things, major differences is that home value and home debt are reported on the profile. But we take steps, as is our prerogative at Skidmore, to minimize the impact that home equity has on the calculation. So we know that home equity is not the same as what you might have as an asset in cash and savings. So $100,000 in equity in your home is not the same thing as $100,000 in the bank. We know that here in the financial aid office at Skidmore, and we factor it in appropriately so that we don't want anyone to have to sell their house to send their son or daughter to Skidmore. So we're very reasonable in the financial aid office as to how we assess your ability to contribute to your son or daughter's education, or parents' ability to contribute. So, but we do look at home value and debt. It does give us some information. You do report how much you have in retirement funds. It's not factored in the calculation though. So when we're determining your financial need, we're not using your retirement funds as part of your assets. But once we put together a financial aid award letter, and let's say you're admitted and you receive that decision and you want to talk to us because you feel like it's not enough for you to be able to attend Skidmore or send your son or daughter, then we might look at your retirement funds. How is this family situated for the future after Skidmore? And we sort of just eyeball that and take that into consideration. So we do ask that you provide that on the CSS profile. We're looking at where else, if there is a sibling attending college, where else they are attending and how much you're contributing toward that educational expense. And not just if they're attending another college, but if they're attending a private high school and you're paying tuition, we want to know that too. And we might be able to take that right up into consideration right up front. So it's giving us a lot more data than is collected on the FAFSA, and we're usually using that in a way that's helpful to you. In addition to giving us more and better information, it also comes with a different formula to determine what theoretically you can contribute toward your son or daughter's education. That formula is often more beneficial or forgiving to the family than the formula that comes with the FAFSA form. So that's another reason it's a better, more forgiving formula with the College Board CSS profile, usually, not always, than the FAFSA. So we don't need the FAFSA until the student enrolls, but we need the profile from every applicant that wants to be considered for Skidmore grant assistance. And as I said, that deadline is today. You still have time to do it, but don't go crazy trying to do it tonight. You still have, we'll give you more time to the end of January if you need it. We can go on, I think. Oh, more about the profile, right? So this is a screenshot of the profiles homepage. So online, these links are available right on the Skidmore Financial Aid webpage. So you can go to skidmore.edu/financial aid, and you'll see in the left-hand margin, there's a link for forms and documents. You can go there and you'll see the CSS profiles at first on the list, followed by the FAFSA. And so that Skidmore requires the CSS profile. Not every college does, only fewer than 1,000 out of the over 3,000 colleges in the US require the CSS profile. So that big red arrow is showing you, if you go to the CSS profile webpage, you can click on that link and it'll tell you all the colleges that require the CSS profile for the 25-26 academic year. We'll go ahead. New York's just being helpful here and letting you know that if you're a New York State student and you want to attend a New York State college that is a SUNY or a CUNY, there's something called the New York State Excelsior Scholarship. This is about a $5,000 scholarship, depending upon your parents' adjusted gross income. It's a separate application that you would complete. Usually it's available in March. The URL is there. You'll be getting this presentation, so you'll be able to have a chance to write all that down. Or you can just Google New York State Excelsior Scholarship. Again, you have to be a New York State resident attending a New York State public New York State college, so a SUNY or a CUNY. There is a big caveat to that, which is if you receive the scholarship, you have to promise to stay in New York State after you graduate and work for the same amount of time for which you received the scholarship. So if you received the scholarship for 2 semesters, you have to stay in New York State and work for the equivalent period of time. If you receive it for 4 years, you are, by receiving the scholarship, promising to stay in New York State and work for that same period of time. So that's something you may or may not want to consider if you're looking at graduate school after undergraduate school. But anyway, did want to mention that as a big opportunity if you're interested. And that's the question I was trying to get to answer Janessa's. And so all of those applications and that list of government source of fundings, and you heard me say that Skidmore grant is by a long shot the most significant source of financial aid at Skidmore. So all of that is about and around financial need. And so the financial aid office is going to calculate your financial need if you complete the financial aid application. And the way we do that is the same regardless of the college that you're applying to. We are all in the financial aid office taking our costs of attendance, subtracting your calculated family contribution from the profile or student aid index from the data on the FAFSA, and the result is your demonstrated financial need at our college. So the demonstrated financial need can really vary widely depending upon the cost of attendance even if the family contribution student aid index is the same, you're one family, you're completing the financial aid applications, your need could be all over the place because of the variance in cost of attendance between and from college to college. So here's that middle number, the estimated family contribution or student aid index. How are we getting that number? That is coming from the FAFSA and or profile, and it's calculated based on the income and asset data you're providing, as well as some of your demographic information. So it's looking at each formula is looking at household size. Is it a family size of 2 with 1 in college? Is it a family size of 4 with 2 in college? Is it a family size of 8 with 1 in college, et cetera? So those factors go into these very complicated formulas to determine your family contribution or student aid index. Parent income, so your adjusted gross income plus certain kinds of untaxed income. Usually the primary source of untaxed income is child support received. Student income, if there is any, if they had any earnings for 25-26, it'll be in 2023. Parent assets, for federal aid, assets are how much you have in cash, savings, and checking. If you have investments that are not in qualified retirement plans, if you have real estate for the federal aid that is not your primary residence, any equity in other real estate is considered an asset. And if you own a business and have equity in the business, that's counted as an asset as well. On the profile side, all of those things are counted as assets, plus any home equity. For student assets, exactly the same thing. What does the student have in cash, savings, and checking? What does the student have in any investments? What does the student own a business? Do they have property? Those are the investments or the assets. There are 2 sections of the formula. So it's put through how much might the student and parent be able to contribute from income? How much might the student and parent be able to contribute from assets? Those calculations are then added together for the family contribution or the student aid index. And that, can you go back one slide, Janessa? Please. That calculated figure for the family contribution or student aid index is then plugged in the middle there. We take our costs minus your calculated family contribution student aid index, and that's how we determine your financial need for Skidmore grant and your financial need for federal student aid. You can keep going if you would. So this really demonstrates how the cost of attendance plays into the calculation of financial need. So this is an example of a family size of 4, 1 student in college, and a family income of around 80,000. This slide is a little old, so I would say around 90,000 would be the income to produce a family contribution or student aid index of around 9,000. So let's say we have a student who's applied to a 4-year public that costs around $19,500. Let's say tuition, fees, room and board. The family contribution is $9,000. So the demonstrated financial need the student would have at a 4-year public in that set of circumstance would be $10,500. Let's say they also apply to a 4-year private that costs substantially more, around $50,000 more. Well, obviously their financial need is going to be much higher. The family is going to have a demonstrated need of $61,000. And let's say that same student applied to a New York State community college where the tuition and fees are around $3,500. The student would demonstrate no financial need at the community college. So here we have one student who qualifies for a range of financial aid from 0 to 61,000. And that's why when you get these financial aid decisions after you've been admitted at different colleges, they could be very different. And to further, explain things, I guess. So let's say at a 4-year public, your need is $10,500. That doesn't guarantee you that you're going to get $10,500 in financial aid. You'll qualify for the federal student loans, but you won't qualify for the Pell Grant because your income's higher than essentially poverty level. You will qualify for New York State TAP if you're a New York State student and attending a New York State college, and that TAP would be about 1,000. You'd get the minimum TAP award. And that's it. You might get work study, you might not, but there's no rule or law or regulation that says a college has to provide $10,000, 500 in financial aid if your calculated need is 10,500. There are many colleges that would like to do so. In fact, every college would like to do so, but they may not have the resources to be able to do so, or the kind of endowment that Skidmore has, where we are able to do so. So with Skidmore, we have a policy and a commitment that if you apply for financial aid and demonstrate need, and we admit you, we promise to meet your demonstrated need with that amount of financial aid, not just the first year, but every year. So that's our commitment to our applicants, our students who are admitted. You apply for aid on time or by the end of January. I don't mean to say if you apply tomorrow, this isn't true. If you apply for financial aid by the time we admit you, we will provide financial aid that equals your demonstrated financial need, whether that's 61,000 or 31,000 or even more. So we promise to do that over your 4 years so that you can persist and stay and graduate. Our students are not leaving Skidmore because they can't afford to stay. They are able to continue even if a parent loses a job, even if a younger sibling ends up going to college and they overlap and your need increases. You reapply for financial aid on time every year. We're going to increase your financial aid, your grant assistance, to help you afford to be able to stay at Skidmore. So wanted to pause there because that's pretty significant. There are not very many colleges in the US who can proudly say what I just did, which is we promise to meet your financial need each year. Your job is to complete the financial aid applications accurately and on time. So at Skidmore, if we calculated your need to be 61,000, we would put in the financial aid package or combination of resources, a $3,500 federal student loan, $2,600 in work study, and the rest of that 61,000 will be grant assistance. Any combination of federal, state, or institutional, but it will be grant assistance. That's how we do it. It's that simple. And that's why, honestly, it's a pleasure to be in the financial aid office at Skidmore. In the community college scenario, the student doesn't qualify for a financial need, but they can still borrow $3,500 in the unsubsidized type of federal student loan and finance their own educational experience. They might not be able to afford to stay on campus, or they may borrow other kinds of loans to be able to stay on campus. A lot of community colleges have campus housing these days, actually. But they can go to college full-time on their own, paying through this federal type of student loan and get access to education that's still possible, I'm happy to say, in the United States. Back to the 4-year private, and let's say that's Skidmore and you're an international student, and let's say your financial need is 61,000 or 70,000. International students don't qualify for federal student loans. So the way we put together a financial aid award for an international student is we offer work study, because international students are allowed to work on Skidmore campus. And then the rest of your need is met with grant assistance. So we take that commitment seriously, whether you're a US resident, a permanent resident, or a US citizen, or an international student. If you apply for financial aid on time and you're admitted, we're going to try to help make it affordable. You've got to demonstrate financial need, though. That's the caveat. So about 50% of our students and families demonstrate financial need at Skidmore and are helped with Skidmore grant assistance. About 50% of our students do not demonstrate financial need and do not qualify for grant assistance, and they pay the full price out of pocket. We have on our website, the admissions website, in fact, 6 scenarios of whether you might qualify for financial aid. On the financial aid website, we have we have 2 net price calculators designed to let you shop and get an early idea of eligibility. I will say that roughly, I'm asked this all the time, what's the income cutoff? At what point do I not qualify for grant assistance? And I'm always going to answer first with, it depends. Do you have one in college or two? That makes a big difference in eligibility. What are your assets like? Instead of just me guessing, why don't you go to one of those calculators? One is very simple, just a few questions, and you'll get an idea of eligibility right away without any strings attached or having to complete the actual profile. But at this point, based on our costs, I would say your income would have to be above 350,000 for me to say, you know what, you're probably not going to qualify unless you have more than one dependent enrolled at the same time. So we'll have just dated this recording by saying that, because as the costs increase, the level of the criteria increases. But if your income is below that, I would say it's worth your while to complete the financial aid application and have us look it over and see whether you qualify. But no one has to apply for financial aid at Skidmore. As I said, about 50% don't apply for financial aid or don't qualify if they do apply for financial aid. I've probably belabored that point enough, haven't I, Janessa?
Honestly, Beth, I think you did exactly what you desired, and I'm sure many of our attendees tonight, or this morning, or the afternoon, wherever you all are, really appreciate this breakdown and really understanding your options. Of course, just as Beth mentioned, we are just so delighted that you have Skidmore on your radar, and we also know that you as students, as families, you all have to make informed decisions, and we want you to be equipped with the information for you to make an informed decision, particularly in the financial space. And so before we transition over to questions, I know that we have a couple of pieces of advice, and we also have some information that we wanted to share with you before we get into that Q&A. And again, huge shout out to our wonderful colleagues, Deanna and Lisa, who have been able to answer those questions in the background. But Beth, when we talk about financial aid, we spent a great deal of time talking about need-based financial aid. Can you share a little bit about the difference between a need-based award and a merit-based award? Because of course, I know some of this can just be confusing in general.
Yeah. Yeah, it is confusing, and policies vary across colleges. I'll start with Skidmore. So at Skidmore, 99 or 98% of our grant budget, which is millions of dollars, is awarded based on the family's financial circumstances. But we do have two non-need based awards. We have two scholarships. One is called the Filene Scholarship. It's a music scholarship. There's a competition held on campus. On your admission application or supplement, I think you indicate that you would be interested, and you submit a video, I guess, of example of your talent, and then our music faculty review those, and perhaps you'll be invited to compete on campus. If you were to be a finalist and then compete on campus and then be considered a winner, there are four winners of those scholarships, and they are $20,000 per year, up to 4 years, on top of any need-based financial aid that you've been awarded. Capping that at our scholarship. There's a Porter Wackenheim Math, Science, Computer Science Scholarship, so essentially a STEM scholarship for students who are very accomplished and interested in those fields. There's a separate essay that was part of is part of the admission application that you can complete, outlining your interests and experience and passion for those fields. Our faculty also review and select students as winners. We have usually between 50 and 75 of our admitted students are selected as winners of that. And the award is also $20,000 a year for up to 4 years, on top of any need-based awards that you receive, capping at our cost of attendance as well. So we have both, but primarily we're trying to help families who couldn't afford, well-qualified students who couldn't afford to attend Skidmore attend through our grant assistance support. Other colleges have different philosophies and policies. So you might have a college that your need has been determined to be 61,000. They don't have the resources to be able to meet everyone's need who they admit. So they may say, well, we can't give you 61,000. They're not going to say that, but here's a $15,000 presidential scholarship. We hope you'll attend. So that happens a lot in colleges. You get a merit or non-need based award. It's an incentive for you to enroll by discounting their price. Usually if a college is doing that in a big way, they're not able to meet the demonstrated need of all of their super well qualified students who need help in order to attend. But that is an option. These net price calculators, I said we have one on the financial aid website. Every college in the United States that accepts federal funding is required to have a net price calculator on their website somewhere. These calculators, if a college offers general merit, just, based on your GPA or something, those are usually factored into the net price calculator. So when you're completing net price calculators, you might see questions that have nothing to do with your financial circumstances, like what are you interested in majoring in? And, do you have any family members that graduated from our college? That's so they can assess you for non-need-based aid. So both types are out there. One's not better than the other. They're just different, and they come from different colleges with different philosophies. So I think this is our final slide, other than getting ready for Q&A, and hopefully you can stay with us a little longer, because I do want to answer questions that you may have that I may have missed in the presentation. But when you get that first financial aid award letter and your offer of admission, make sure you understand what it means over the 4 years. So I've told you all that we promise to meet the need every year. So not every college does that. You might get a great financial aid award the first year, and then something changes, your need goes up, but the college doesn't have a policy of increasing your aid over time. So if you think something may be happening, like a younger sibling may be attending college as well in the future, you want to talk with the financial aid office to see how does that impact things in the future. You don't want to assume anything. If you've been awarded a merit award, you want to understand what's the condition of getting that again in the future. Maybe you got a great, $25,000 merit award the first year. Oh, but you have to have a 3.8 GPA, and 90% of the students who are awarded that presidential scholarship don't get it again as a sophomore, junior, or senior. Wouldn't that be good to know as you're doing your financial planning over the long term, not just the immediate first year? If you get a financial aid award letter from Skidmore or anyone, anywhere, and it's just not enough for you to send your son or daughter, or for the student, to be able to attend, you can appeal that financial aid decision. And that's just a fancy word of saying you want to ask for reconsideration. You need more funds in order to be able to attend. The financial aid offices across the country are staffed with people just like me. They're just there trying to process your aid and help families afford our education. We know if the admissions office has admitted you, we really want you to attend. There's not a huge percentage of our, let's put it this way, the vast majority of applicants are not admitted to Skidmore. So if our admissions office says, yes, we want the student, then we want to try to make it happen for you. So don't be afraid to call or email the financial aid office and ask for help if you need it, rather than just saying, forget it, we can't afford it, we've got to look somewhere else. And that's true not just at Skidmore, but of any college that you're attending, although I'm sure you're all mostly interested in Skidmore. And let's see, right, we all have different deadlines. Ours is today, but we're going to be flexible. Institutional grants, I'm giving you a lot about Skidmore's policy, but they can, of course, vary across the board. And you want to make sure that it's the student's educational experience, but it's got to be affordable for the whole family. We really want you to attend. And let's say you appeal and you're like, we cannot afford what you've put there. And we're like, we've done everything we can. We hope you can make it work. We don't want anyone to go into huge indebtedness in order to be able to attend Skidmore. That's just not going to be a success story for anyone. So we want you to be reasonable, whether it's Skidmore you're looking at or any college. Be careful, pay attention. You can make it work, whether it's a community college for the first 2 years, then transfer to Skidmore, or there's lots of ways to to be successful on your own individual path. And we're here to try and help you through it, and we'll do what we can. That's the bottom line, I guess. So if you want to,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yes. And, as we transition over to this next slide here, of course, Beth has been so gracious to be able to share information, how to connect with us, and how to connect with her team, and in the financial aid office. Beth's team not only works with wonderful students and families like you who are considering applying to Skidmore, or may have perhaps been enrolled at this point as well. Her team also supports students throughout their experience here at Skidmore. Everything from special circumstances to nuances and life events. We are very much aware that many families across the country, across the world, are experiencing different things, whether that's in their backyard or something that's a little bit more honed in and on a larger scale, particularly thinking of those on the West Coast here in the United States right now as well. Those special circumstances are pieces that we want to know about. And then the nuances that Beth has mentioned, particularly as she indicated the CSS profile, that provides the opportunity to provide those circumstances, so that way we can put our best foot forward on your behalf. So with that in mind, as I continue to also support Beth, because I know you have been talking quite a bit here, and our wonderful team has been able to respond to so many different aspects. There are some special programs here that have been mentioned, and I wanted to briefly ask you, Beth, to highlight briefly the Yellow Ribbon program in terms of the benefit that students may have and families may have in that space, as well as tuition exchange, and how that is incorporated into the process.
Okay, great. Thank you. Those are two lesser known non-need based awards that a student could receive through Skidmore. So Yellow Ribbon is for a certain chapter veterans of U.S. military service, or it can be transferred to their children. Skidmore is a yellow ribbon school, which means we participate in that matching scholarship grant program with the Veterans Administration. So for students who qualify and attend Skidmore, we match $10,000 with the VA. In addition to any need-based financial aid that you have. So that would be $20,000, $10,000 more from Skidmore, $10,000 from the Veterans Administration on top of the need-based award. There are a limited number of awards we make for that, and that's on first come, first serve basis on enrollment. If you have any questions about that, please go ahead. Up on the screen is the financial aid office email. There's only 6 of us in the financial aid office, so don't feel like you're sending this and it's going into some black hole somewhere. If you send an email to us, it'll be farmed out to the right financial aid administrator. And if it's about Yellow Ribbon, it'll come to me and I'll reply to you. But we do have limited slots for that. First come, first serve, $10,000 matching in addition to any need-based aid you might qualify for. And the other thing you mentioned was tuition exchange scholarship. That's for employees of participating colleges. And so it's a tuition exchange. It's so we have I think the award for next year of the set amount is $42,000. That's on the tuition exchange website, but it's around that amount, if not exactly that amount. The employee student complete an application and list their interest in Skidmore. Then we know you're a tuition exchange applicant in addition to an admissions applicant, and perhaps also in addition to a financial aid applicant. Financial aid would be separate from tuition exchange. We'll review those and let you know if you're admitted, whether you are going to be receiving. There'll be a separate tuition exchange letter with your offer of admission and perhaps your offer of financial aid, advising you of whether or not you qualify for tuition exchange at Skidmore. So we review those applicants closely with the Office of Admission, and our Vice President for Admission and Financial Aid makes those final decisions. But that is part of the process, and you'll know along with, and I should have said this too, if you're admitted to Skidmore, you'll log on to the portal, you'll see your offer of admission as well as your financial aid offer. And if also tuition exchange, your tuition exchange letter as well. So all of that will be provided to you together with your admission decision.
Yes, to emphasize exactly what Beth mentioned, and I know this has been answered in the Q&A as well, but if you are submitting your documents at the time that we are reviewing your application for admission, at the time you receive your admissions decision, you will also receive your financial aid award. And Beth's team does a really great job of not only sharing the breakdown of that award, but also the terminology and the context. And again, having follow-up opportunities for you all to ask questions. Especially if things change. There is a great question here in the chat, and it's kind of a two-pronged question. For example, and I think I know the answer to this, if there was a mistake that was entered on the CSS profile or another document, for example, how do you correct that problem? What suggestions would you be able to provide?
Okay, so the CSS profile only has limited ability to, or offers limited access to make corrections. They have to be major mistakes on the CSS profile for the College Board to allow you to make a correction. The best bet is to email us in the financial aid office right at that website, or whatever financial aid office, and say, I am the parent of this student, or I am this student, and this is what we put on the CSS profile, which was a mistake. This is the correct information. This is a super busy time in the financial aid office, so if you can be clear and concise like that, if it's more complicated, nuanced, you're not sure if you made a mistake or not, that's when you should call or email the financial aid office and just say, I'm not sure, these are confusing forms. Did we do this right, or did we make a mistake? And then that, if it's at Skidmore, we'll tell you what next steps to take, and I'm sure any financial aid office would do the same.
Excellent. And along those lines with the forms, we have some excellent questions coming from international applicants regarding the difference between the CSS profile and our homegrown form that may be accessible in an applicant portal. Is there a preference between those two forms in that space for international applicants?
Yeah, I'd say if you can afford to complete the CSS profile, like I said, it just gives us much better information. If you cannot afford to pay the fee for the CSS profile, then you should use the abbreviated form in the admissions portal, which won't cost you anything. So that's really the bottom line. It's you know, it's a matter of affordability for you, and we want to be sensitive to that. We don't have CSS fee waiver codes. We have this option instead of the CSS profile. If you can't afford it, do this one in the admissions portal. If you do the CSS profile, we'll waive the application for financial aid that shows up otherwise in your admission portal. You don't have to do both.
Excellent, excellent. And of course, as it relates to that CSS profile and the FAFSA in that space, we may include, particularly for U.S. citizens and permanent residents, we may require parents' W-2s and tax documentation, for example, in that space. Can you share a little bit about what that process looks like afterwards, particularly for those families who are thinking, how do I send this directly to the college?
Yeah, so we actually don't require the W-2s or the tax returns, just like with the FAFSA, until and unless the student has been admitted and enrolls, and then not until May. And so we will shepherd any admitted and enrolled students through that process, showing them how. We'll provide lots of instruction, email, postcards, how to upload that data to us. But if you're an admission applicant and you're applying for financial aid, we don't require those things up front. We don't need them up front. We don't have the capacity to review them all up front. So you don't need to send them to us. If you're an early decision round one student who's been admitted and enrolled and you want to send us the W-2s, you absolutely can. You just go to the financial aid website. There's a link for submit documents and you can follow the instructions there. We don't want your tax return unless you didn't successfully use the IRS data retrieval information when completing the FAFSA. So that's why we say, why don't you, hold off. The W-2s, we do collect those. You can send those to us and that'd be great if you're an enrolled student. but hold off on the tax return. We're going to get that information verified through the FAFSA, so we don't need to separately review your tax return. I hope that was clear.
Very clear, and much appreciated, Beth. And one last question that I'm actually able to support with this well. There's a great question about test optional policies and how that impacts the student's eligibility. And, from an admissions perspective, very similar to our financial aid commitment to meeting 100% of demonstrated need for all of our admitted students. In admissions, we are truly committed to our test optional policy. And so that also extends not only for consideration for admission, but also for those partial scholarships that Beth has mentioned as well, the Feline music competition, as well as the Porta Wachenheim scholarship for students who are deeply invested in science and mathematics. We understand there are many different ways and variables that students can show their achievement, show their affinity for these incredible spaces, and it will not have a negative impact. In fact, it's not considered as we are navigating this process if you choose not to submit those test scores. Overall, the majority of our students here at Skidmore do not submit testing, and they tend to graduate with the GPA very similar to those who do. And so I think that's really important to keep in mind. But honestly, at this time, we have gone through so many wonderful nuanced questions. And Beth, you have taken us through the process from initiation definition all the way to I have the award in front of me. What does it mean, right? And you have done so beautifully alongside answering all of our questions here in the background. Again, the financial aid information here posted on this page is here for your support, for your engagement. If you happen to be listening through a recording and you're taking your notes, know that we are happy to have these conversations with you along the way. And ultimately, we want to ensure that you feel as empowered and as inspired throughout this process as much as possible. It's a big one at the end of the day, but we are here alongside you. Beth, it is always a pleasure. I'm telling you, I have my notes. I always learn something new from you. And it's a pleasure to continue to do this excellent work with you. For everyone, thank you for sticking with us. I see several of you have decided to stay with us. We hope that you have as good of an evening, morning, or afternoon as absolutely possible. And again, special thanks to Deanna and Lisa, who have been supportive in the background. We hope that you all have a good one. Take good care.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. And you, Janessa. Thank you.
Thank you.